Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to Developing Inferencing Skills for Literature Through Students' Personal Experiences. My name is Wesley Martin. I'm from the University of Iowa, and I'm very happy to be here at TESOL 2022 this year. So let's get started about talking about what inferencing is before we talk about how we can develop it. So inferencing is the process of making logical assumptions based on details in a text. And it's challenging because it involves a reading between the lines, so to speak, or beyond the words that are on the page, that are explicitly declared for the readers. And it's important because authors often leave these details as little clues. And we can use these to do things like find out what characters' personalities are like. We can use these to infer characters' actions, motivations, why they're doing things. And we can also use them to predict future events in a story. So inferencing is, needless to say, a pretty important skill. And we usually teach inferencing using 3 steps. And the first one is find a detail in the reading. The second one is make the hypothesis or assumption about that detail. And then the third one is see if it's supported when you read on later in the text. But this might be a bit too abstract for some learners. It seems a bit scientific as well. It literally looks like the scientific method verbatim. And reading can be an art, right? So one other way we can teach this skill is by realizing that we often make assumptions and hypotheses based on details in our daily lives. And this is also a form of inferencing because we're noticing a detail and we're kind of assuming that it means something, right? And then we go through our lives and our own personal stories, and we're going to see if it's updated or if we need to update it, if it's validated or not. So we can consider the following questions. What logical assumptions have you made during your own life story? What details made you make the assumptions, and what did the details mean to you? So let's see some examples by what I mean by connecting inferencing to this process of inferring in our daily lives. So I spent 4 years myself, almost, teaching in South Korea, and I really love Korean food, but sometimes it was a bit too spicy. And one night I wanted to try to eat a pepper. And I noticed that the peppers on the dish were light green. And I thought, oh, these are safe to eat because the spicier peppers are darker colored. And I put it in my mouth, and the second I bit down, I had instant regret. I probably spent about 10 minutes tearing up and having to drink water, and it was just one of the worst barbecues I'd ever had because of that pepper, right? So we'll talk about this in a little bit. We'll break it down, but notice that I made an assumption about a detail, just like a story of my student who I can share with his permission. One day he was on the beach in his home country, and it was a beautiful day, and he was swimming without a care, and then suddenly he notices what every swimmer dreads, a fin in the water, and he cries out, "Shark!" and he gets everybody off the beach, and he's piling everybody out of there. And then somebody comes around to check this fin, and they notice the characteristic curve in the backside. And it turns out that this shark that my student had tried to prevent from attacking everybody on the beach was in fact a dolphin. So what happened in these 2 stories that are from real personal stories, our own lives? Notice that we started with details. The pepper is light colored, and darker peppers are hot, so the light one is safe, therefore. And in the second story, there's a gray fin in the water, and sharks have large gray fins. Therefore, it must be a shark. Therefore, we're all in danger because, well, sharks like to eat people. But then we went on through our own personal stories, our own lives, and then we saw the reality. And the reality was that, oh, hey, actually, this pepper is really, really, really hot and probably should not eat that. And the reality for my former student was that sharks have large gray fins, therefore this must be a shark, so we are all in danger. Reality was, well, it's a dolphin. So neither of these hypotheses were supported. But notice that we can now update our steps to reflect this process of inferring things from our own lives by adding on this little thing of ask what the details mean to the students, right? Have them develop a hypothesis based on their experiences. And then they can read on to see if what's in their experiences were supported or not. So we can go ahead and start by considering the case of Mrs. Beatty from Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet. I'm not going to give away too much about the novel. I want to see what we can infer based on the details I'm going to give from it. So Mrs. Beatty is a lunch lady, and she's the lunch lady to a young Chinese American boy. And the novel starts with these descriptions that Mrs. Beatty is a gassy hairnet wearing definition of broad, meaning wide. and talking about thick forearms and fishing out a Zippo lighter and starting to smoke, and her saying to the students that she bets that they're related, things like that, right? So already we know, we can infer that maybe she's large, intimidating, prejudiced. And on my own experiences, my father told me many stories about a scary lunch lady growing up. So my hypothesis is that Mrs. Beatty is going to be an adversary to the main character. She's going to be mean to him, right? So now let's see if this is supported if we read onwards. But then we can see some more details filtering in much later in the novel. Things like, well, she snapped with the motion of her meaty arm, she's mean, but she's also ordering rice for people in an internment camp. That wasn't on the culinary list, and she's smuggling items into the camps. And importantly, she selected Henry, the Chinese American boy, to work at the camp where his love interest is interred. So why did she choose the main character to work in the camp who is Chinese American? Maybe she's not as prejudiced as we thought. Based on this whole thing of, oh, you're Chinese and she's Japanese, you must be related. So now my hypothesis is that she's going to have some kind of tough love for Henry and she wants to help him. And it turns out this is in fact what happens. She is a part of the effort, I guess, to feed the interred Japanese in World War II in the United States. And she's a tough woman that shows Henry tough love all throughout the novel up until the very end, helping him find his love interest who is interred in the camp. So let's go ahead and take a look at the steps one more time. We find the relevant details. We ask the students what they mean to them based on their experiences, right? Have them develop a hypothesis based on this knowledge and experience, and then they can read on to see if their hypotheses are supported. So thank you very much for attending this presentation, by the way. So one last little note. We all have a unique story, and therefore we may have different hypotheses, a bit of bias, right? So we should create a conversation based on this, right, with other students to see whose details, you know, which ones get closer to the mark, maybe. And if you want to see conversation, go ahead and check out my other Pechakucha, Developing Cultural Sensitivity Through the Use of Historical Fiction. Here are my references. And thank you very much for listening to this Pechakucha.